It's wonderful to have this event here at Curtin University. Curtin has a strong record of commitment to human rights and social justice, and after all, this is a university named for John Curtin, arguably Australia's greatest Prime Minister, who prosecuted a social justice agenda. And most of us arriving here today, I think, probably walked along the Rob Riley Walk just outside, which commemorates the memory of one of the elders I mentioned earlier. Rob, we lost tragically about 20 years ago, and 20 years ago this December he was posthumously awarded the Human Rights Medal. Today, Curtin University continues proudly to pursue the causes of human rights and social justice through our Ethics, Equity and Social Justice Unit, and through, of course, our Centre for Human Rights Education, who are hosting this event today. But also through the research and the teaching and the activities of many of our staff and students across the campus and across our many campuses, who are consciously striving to live the Curtin's values of integrity, respect and courage. Just this morning I was in an academic board meeting and we spent some time considering our newest strategic plan. We've got various drafts, but we're getting close to the point of having the kind of high-level stuff in the final draft stage. And we're making a commitment there above all to building a fairer and more just society. The notion of social justice is a crucial part of how this university sees itself and how it positions itself. I'm delighted and honoured today to welcome our guest this afternoon. I am under judicial orders to cut this back, but I will say a few things. Michael Donald Kirby, AC, CMG, was Australia's longest-serving judge from 1996 to 2009. And in addition to his judicial duties, he served on 3 university governing bodies and was Chancellor of Macquarie University in Sydney from 1984 to 1993. As you will know, you need really no introduction, Michael Kirby has served on many national and international bodies, including as a member of the World Health Organization's Global Commission on AIDS, President of the International Commission of Jurists, Geneva, UN Special Representative to Human Rights in Cambodia, a member of the UNESCO International Bioethics Committee, member of the High Commissioner for Human Rights Judicial Reference Group, and member of the UN AIDS Reference Group on HIV and Human Rights. In 2010, he was awarded the Gruber Justice Prize. Between 2010 and 2012, he served on the UNDP Global Commission of HIV and the Law, and in 2013 was appointed a Commissioner of the UN AIDS Commission on Sustainable Health. And later in that year, he was appointed by the President of the UN Human Rights Council, pursuant to a resolution of the Council, to head the Commission of Inquiry on alleged human rights violations in the Democratic People's Republic of Korea. It's with great pleasure that I ask him to speak to us, invite him to speak to us today on this topic, from Alfred Kinsey to Orlando and beyond. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Dench, and thank you for welcoming me once again to Curtin University. I'm very proud that the Council of the University has named me as patron of the Centre for Human Rights Education, and I pledge myself to take a very active, not overactive, but an active role in the work of the Centre and in the LGBTI network of scholars which will continue and expand the work of the Centre. It is a nationwide first, really, to have this enterprise, and it is typical and admirable that it is happening here at Curtin University. I also honour the Indigenous people of our land. I came this morning from Sydney. I had to get up at 3:30 to catch the 6 o'clock flight to fly over this huge continental country. Looking down, I thought of the many wrongs that have been done over the last 230 years to the Indigenous people, and many of those wrongs were done through the law. And in that sense, Indigenous people and the LGBTIQ minority share something in common. It is wrong, discrimination, injustice, and the role of the law in doing it that binds us together. And so that I appropriately start with thinking of those wrongs and the wrongs to other minorities and to other people in Australia, which the work of the Centre for Human Rights Education and the network are going to be playing a part to correct and redress. I acknowledge the presence here, Member of Parliament and other leading citizens and students who have come along to think upon the issue of injustices. It's right as human beings that we should do that. It's especially right on Wear Purple Day, which is today, that we should wear purple, that we should remember the burden and the hostility that is suffered by young LGBTI people. And that is a phenomenon here in Perth, as I found from an earlier visit here to Western Australia, that with the Safe Schools program that has been rolled out throughout Australia, in this state, this huge state, 27 schools, secondary schools have adopted the program. Of the 27, 26 are public schools, and only one private school has accepted the Safe Schools program. There is a personal pastoral duty of schools to their LGBTIQ pupils to reach out to them, to strengthen them, reassure them, and that obligation extends all the way across this continent, from the east coast to the west coast, and it certainly includes the mighty state of Western Australia. So I hope that we're going to see some progress on this. My experience has been that this is not an issue that always divides along party lines. There are good people in all of the parties and in the Parliament, and I think good people will be concerned about the feeling of hostility, loneliness, isolation and low self-worth that exists in schools which do not have an agenda for sexuality education that has meaning for them. It may need some tweaking and adjustment of exactly what is taught, but that it is essential that every child in this state has the same information, basic information, that is, in my view, unarguable. And I hope that our political representatives will come to an appreciation of that. Now, my remarks today, which have to be necessarily rather brief, I mean, it's very hard for lawyers to say anything briefly, but I'm going to try to do it. My remarks are going to fall into three parts, like Caesar's Gaul. First, I'm going to say something about Alfred Kinsey. Second, I'm going to say something about Orlando. And thirdly, I'm going to try to present a checklist of some factors, 10 factors I've identified, which explain, or help to explain, or may explain hostility to LGBTIQ people that cause homophobia, transphobia, and hostility to sexual minorities. So they're the three parts of my lecture. It's appropriate that I start with Alfred Kinsey because 60 years ago exactly, Alfred Kinsey died in 1956 in Bloomington, Indiana, in the United States of America, where he did his great research. He was born in 1894 in New Jersey in the United States. His family were not wealthy. His father was a professor, and of course professors have always been underpaid, but he was a professor in a local technical institute of engineering, and he wanted the young Alfred to be an engineer, and he encouraged him to do that. But Kinsey wanted to be a biologist. He was very interested in nature. He went on many walks with the Scouts and he loved nature, and that is what attracted his attention. His father didn't approve of his interest in biology, which he thought to be a rather feminine sort of a thing, but Alfred Kinsey studied biology and got high qualifications, went to Harvard and graduated in biology. His father wouldn't come to his graduation, but he persisted. He was a man of resolute decision. And he married in 1921 Clara Macmillan, who was his life partner and spouse, by whom he had 4 children, 3 of whom survived. And he became an expert in a particular area of biology, gall wasps. Gall wasps are a kind of bee. They are a member of the bee family. And Alfred Kinsey was absolutely fascinated with gall wasps. He became a professor of zoology at Indiana University, and he had 18 million gall wasps in his collection. They're still there at Indiana University, 18 million gall wasps. But in about 1935, he thought that he would examine the sex life of gall wasps, and that got him to looking at the mating habits of this creature of our planet. And at about that time, he was asked by someone to come along to a marriage counselling session and to give a lecture on human mating behaviour and human sexual conduct. And that led him to give a lecture which turned out to be tremendously popular. The lecture theatre was filled, as this lecture theatre is, and people were very interested to hear what the learned doctor had to say, extrapolating from the growing experience he was getting in the case of gall wasps into the human species. And that is when a magical moment happened in his brain. He did what happens often in science. People don't come at scientific issues and novelty by a totally logical course. Serendipity and propinquity can sometimes lead to great leaps in scientific knowledge, and so it was with Kinsey. And so he began an investigation of human sexuality, and he did it by an empirical method. He did it by conducting structured interviews of thousands and thousands of people in the United States. The sampling which he did was very extensive. It has sometimes been criticised as to its detail by the development of the science of sampling, but it was fundamentally getting people to talk about their sexual lives, which is something most people don't talk about to anybody, but he got them to talk about it. This hadn't been done before because of the great silence about sex. But Kinsey thought the one place where the silence may be lifted is in a university, where it's possible for the university to uphold the right of investigation. And this is what happened at Indiana University. They happened to have a wonderful vice-chancellor called the president at Indiana University. His name was Herman Wells. And Herman Wells supported Dr. Kinsey in his investigation. And when that support was attacked by politicians and scholars within the university and outside, Dr. Wells said, if what Kinsey is doing is a proper subject of scientific inquiry, it will be done at Indiana University. Indiana University, I remind you, is in Indiana, which is right in the middle of the United States. It's the Bible Belt. It's a very conservative, rural environment, and yet in this most unlikely place, Alfred Kinsey did his research. It led to a book in 1948 called Sexual Behaviour in the Human Male, and to another book in 1953, Sexual Behaviour in the Human Female. In 1953, I was 13, and therefore this was coming into public discourse at the time I was growing up. And it was, to me, as I discovered sexuality and my own sexual orientation as a gay boy, it was something which gave me, personally, a great feeling of acceptance. The fact that the research of Kinsey had shown that far from being alone down there in the leafy suburbs of Concord in Sydney, Australia, I was not alone, and that this was not such a rare thing, and that it was a phenomenon which exists by inference in all societies just because of the nature of human beings. Kinsey devised the so-called Kinsey scale, and the Kinsey scale allocated people into the extent of their identity, sexual identity, on a scale of 1 to 6. If you were 0 or 1, then you were virtually exclusively heterosexual all your life. Your identity, your sexual fantasy, your desire for partners was virtually exclusively heterosexual. And if you were 6, then you were up the other end of the scale, and your identity was virtually exclusively homosexual attraction to your own gender. Kinsey's exact classifications have been the subject of a lot of debate and discussion. His figures have been attacked because he interviewed a lot of prisoners, and it was said that warped that they were not good, decent citizens. They were prisoners, but the likelihood was that they were showing the whole variety of sexual orientation and gender identity of the general population. But anyway, the prisoners and the sex workers were taken out of the figures by later researchers at the Kinsey Institute just to see if they had warped the conclusions. And Professor Gebhardt, who was a colleague of Kinsey, demonstrated that they didn't change the major discovery, which was that the overwhelming majority of people are a 0 or 1, but that there is this pesky group of people who are up the other end, and they are a 6, and there are the 5s and the 4s and the 3s and the 2s, and this is just a feature of the human species. And if it's a feature of the human species, it has a purpose, it has a reason, and anyway it exists, so get used to it. And that was Kinsey's great message. Kinsey became a celebrity with his reports. Hollywood got onto them, as happens in the United States, and the First Amendment, which is the provision of the US Constitution which puts real restrictions on government trying to stop people talking about things, came to his defence, and it allowed Kinsey's reports and the reports of the reports to become very well known, and all of that created a sensation in the United States because fundamentally it challenged the notion that the world was binary, that it was binary men and women and heterosexual people who have an idea of their sexual orientation towards the opposite sex, and that the group of homosexuals who were acting against the law that existed throughout the United States at the time were just horrible people who, in the face of the order of nature, were trying to disrupt society and act in this disgusting and abominable way. And Kinsey put a real doubt about that. And the consequence was that Kinsey became very known in the United States, and his work came out to Australia. He didn't come, but the work became known right throughout the world, particularly in the English-speaking world. Kinsey went all around the United States. He became a very much sought-after conference speaker, and he gave his all to the endeavour, and he died on this day 60 years ago. So Alfred Kinsey, up there looking down on our world, perhaps, he made a big change. He made a change in my life, and he made a change in the lives of all people, including heterosexual people, because heterosexual people have a right to know about these phenomena of human sexuality, and they have a need to be released from the totally binary view of humankind. As I've said, Kinsey's research was attacked, but fundamentally, though there have been many researchers in sexuality since, the fundamental reality that Kinsey portrayed on scales which have been 1 to 10 and other variations of the scale, fundamentally Kinsey's basic proposition has been borne out, and he made a big change, because it's not coincidental that within 10 years of Kinsey's report, the steps were taken in England with the Wolfenden Inquiry, a royal commission in England, that led to the change in the English law against gay people, based upon the fact that it was just irrational and unscientific to declare that they were acting against the order of nature. They were precisely acting in accordance with the order of nature as it concerned them. And so rational people, including in legislatures, started to change the law, and that was the beginning of a mighty change that came in Australia after 1974, when Don Dunstan introduced the changes in South Australia, and ultimately they spread everywhere until 1997 in Tasmania got rid of the last criminal laws against gays. There are still other issues that are outstanding, and I'm not going to embark upon those. We all know what they are, and one of them is before our federal parliament in the here and now. But generally speaking, great changes have happened in my lifetime, and generally they have been for the better, and they continue to be made, and we in Australia will ultimately get to a point where there are no laws that are irrationally discriminatory against LGBT people. It is simply irrational. It's like being horrible to my brother Donald because he's a left-hander. He's thinking of changing his name Donald. I don't quite know why. I think it has something to do with somebody in the United States of America, but he can't change his left-handedness. By the way, hands up everybody in this audience who is left-handed. Yes, that's about it. That's the 13% of our population, and that's just a variation in nature. And it also had religious opponents who pointed out that the devil sat on the left hand of God, and that left-handers really, that's why you had to be caned and made to write with your right hand at school, which is what they tried to do to my brother Donald until my mother intervened. So that is Alfred Kinsey, a really great man, but proving how important universities are, that will do actual research and will collect actual data, that will analyse it in the face of a lot of opposition, challenging long-held and sometimes religiously proclaimed truths, and doing so because of the inquisitive nature of human beings to search for the truth. Now, though we've made many big changes for the better, there have also been some really horrible things happened, including this year. One of them happened in Bangladesh, where two young gay males had set up in their home in Dhaka, the capital of Bangladesh, in East Bengal, West Bengal. East Bengal. They'd set up a gay newspaper, and on one day early this year, a knock on the door. They asked, "Who is it?" And they said, "We're couriers, we've got something for you." The door was opened, and in burst 6 men who hacked them to death. And they were killed, they were left in their own blood and body pieces. The police have arrested one person who they say they've found on CCTV cameras, but it is still not a completely solved crime. They were part of Islamist extremists in Bangladesh who hated these two young men because they were challenging the orthodoxy of the belief in Bangladesh. And in Orlando, in the United States, a terrible incident happened, as we all know, on the 11th of June 2016 at the Pulse nightclub. That was a gay bar and dance hall. They were having, on a Saturday night, a Latin evening. There were 320 people in the club. The last drinks had been called at 2 a.m. on the 12th of June, and suddenly into the club burst Omar Mathieu. He was a 29-year-old, American-born, of Afghani parents who came in with a semi-automatic weapon as well as a pistol, and he began shooting. People fled into the women's toilet, and he went in there after them and shot randomly, and ultimately he caused injury and ultimately death to 49 young people. Their names are on the internet. Most of them were young gay men, and they died senselessly out of hatred. And it turned out, according to a lot of reports, it hasn't yet been finally determined because the inquiry is still ongoing, but a lot of the reports said that the assailant had been seen, Martin had been seen many times in the club, and he had allegedly had relations with some people in the club, and he was a young man who had married, but his wife has since said that she thought he was gay because of their relationship being unsatisfactory and breaking down. The father was constantly going on to him, attacking the gays in the United States of America. And the general feeling, at least at the time that I left the investigation, is that this was a very conflicted gay man who couldn't resolve the conflict, that his father was telling him that he was alien to his religion and his desire to be harmonised with his religion, but the net result was that 49 were killed and he was ultimately killed, making 50 altogether. One has only to pause and think of the terror and of the people in Pulse as they were seeking refuge and being killed. It's a very wicked thing. It is the biggest terrorist attack in the United States of America, apart from the 9/11 attack. The greatest number of people, hostages, who were killed by this vicious attack. I thought it was a good thing that President Obama came onto the television and spoke of what causes this type of hatred that can lead to such random deaths. And President Obama wrote to the parents of the two young gay men in Bangladesh, expressing sorrow at what had happened to them. But sorrow is good and right, but stopping this sort of irrational hatred is our obligation as rational human beings. And Dr. Kinsey, I think, and those who followed him, Evelyn Hooker and others, demonstrate that the best way to tackle and confront these irrational hatreds is going to be science, it's going to be knowledge, it's going to be research and information. It's then going to be built on education and outreach to the general population so that people understand that it is irrational to hate people for something they don't choose and can't change. And once that is realised, we hope that big changes will happen. Now, I've endeavoured to try to put my finger on what are the reasons. What are the reasons that people have these deep feelings of animosity towards a small and not terribly powerful minority in our midst? The first reason, I think, is a conservative disposition. That's to say, a fear of change, of something that has existed for a very long time. Even if you take religion out of it, there are a lot of people who are just very cautious about any changes that alter the settled way of doing things, long-standing attitudes. They don't want change. And this is, I think, the biggest reason. It's even a secular reason. It's a non-religious reason. There are some people who just don't think there should be any change in something which has lasted for so very long, thousands of years, that LGBTIQ people will just shut up, hopefully go away, or at least keep very quiet and don't confront other people with the awful reality that they exist and don't fit into the presumed paradigm. The second reason, I think, is experiential. And in this respect, it's like other fields of minority hatred. Now, in Australia, we have form on this. We had an attitude to the Aboriginal people which proclaimed that they were uncivilised nomads, they would probably intermarry and die out, and that would be a good thing. That was basically the attitude in Australia when I was growing up. And we also had the White Australia policy. Even people who are married overseas found it almost impossible to bring a spouse to Australia. Mr. Caldwell said 2 Wongs don't make a white, and that was thought to be very amusing at the time, and that was a Labor government, and the coalition governments were no different. Australia, the White Australia policy was a foundation principle of the Commonwealth of Australia. And if you don't have much contact with a minority, or you don't think you have much contact with them, then they don't confront your psyche, and you can think horrible things about them. When I was a boy at primary school, there was only one Asian Australian in the class, Bobby Chong. He regularly beat me. He was the only boy in the class who could beat me. And I would go home and tell my mother, and she was astonished that Bobby Chong could beat me. Bobby Chong went on to become a professor of biology, and he went over to New Zealand, and he still comes back, and we still get together, those of us who are left of the class of 1944-48 at North Strathfield Public School, and he's a very distinguished guy, but he tells me it was very hard growing up in Australia back in 1948 because you were part of an alien group who somehow had slipped in, and you were very, very rare. So gays conspire in their own hostility because of the fact that they don't make people confront their existence. And that's why it's very important that people, especially people like me, are completely open about it. It's unscientific and irrational not to be. The third reason is religiosity. Now, there are very few passages in the Judeo-Christian Bible which are hostile to gays. Recently, in new translations, they've inserted the word homosexual into the passages in the Bible. But they weren't there because that's a 19th century word. These are inserting later concepts into the scriptural passages. But the religious texts have been used as a source of hostility against LGBT people. There are a lot of scholars who say this is not a correct reading of the texts, and in any case it's a reading of isolated texts out of the context of the great message of the scripture, which is to love God and love one another. And therefore you're reading something without regard to the context in which it appears. But whatever the reason, religion has sometimes been a source of hostility, and hopefully that is going to change. And certainly there are many religious people, including in Australia, who are understanding of and scientific about LGBT minorities. But it's important that they should have more voice in the religious debate. Fourthly, there are the cultural differences. The two areas of the world which are most hostile to gays are the Arab Islamic area and the British area. It's a truth that every country over which the Union Jack ever flew had to get a lot of good things, but they also had to get a section of their criminal law which made it illegal to be gay and to have any gay sexual activity, no matter that it was in private, no matter that it was with adults, no matter it was fully consenting, it was against the law. And that underlined the hostility. That is proving very difficult to change in both of those two cultural areas. Difficult in the Islamic because of some of the passages in the Hadith, which are the words ascribed to the Prophet about homosexuality, with words of great specificity. The Judeo-Christian Bible is, on the other hand, rather vague about these things. And the central message is comfortable with the human reality of variation. But in the Commonwealth of Nations, the former British Empire, of the 54 member states of the Commonwealth, 42 still have the law against gays. So if you have that law against you, if you're a criminal, then it's very hard to change things until that law is changed. This month, early August, the Supreme Court of Belize made a decision in which they struck down that provision in the Belize criminal law. And the government of Belize immediately announced that it was not challenging the decision and would give effect to it. So it's now 41 out of 54 member states, but it's proving there's a logjam. It's proving very difficult to change. And that is because they inherited this as part of their British heritage and they're sticking with it. The fifth consideration is the complementarity of body parts. That is to say, some of the analysis, particularly supplementing religious analysis, is based upon the sexual organs. We're getting down to the nitty-gritty here, down to the sexual organs of people and the assertion that if nature or God had meant homosexuals to get together, they would have made a more complementary bodily arrangement than exists. Well, I hate to let people into the secret, but first of all, Dr. Kinsey's research shows that in heterosexual sexual activity, there are all sorts of strange arrangements with the body parts, and similarly with homosexual and transgender sexual activity, it's amazing. The human being can find and seek pleasure and love and companionship, and it seems to work okay. But there are these very formalistic people. I mean, I got a paper yesterday written by a man who's now a very senior judge saying, no, the complementarity of the body parts is a reason why we've got to go on being beastly to LGBT people and deny them any right to get married because their two bodies don't fit together. That is, it's a sort of natural law approach to the matter, but it isn't based on actual reality. The sixth is the built-in imagery of every society. There are the weddings, there's the engagement parties, the weddings, the frocks and dresses, the confetti, the children, the christening. The whole of society is sort of organised around the 89% majority of people who are 0 or 1. And trying to get people to think beyond all that imagery is sometimes hard unless they've had some actual close-up experience about it. And this is a difficulty of taking people some way along the journey. Number 7 is the superiority that exists if you think that you are in the ordained and permitted sphere, and without any effort on your own part, you can be horrible to people who are not in that sphere. Bishop Tutu once said that in Africa, and he was trying to explain why there are so horrible attitudes and laws against gays in Africa, and they won't change them. He says it's because everyone has to have someone they can look down on. And therefore, if you are in a minority and you didn't do anything particular to majority, and you didn't do anything particular to get into the majority, you can feel very self-righteous and you can be as horrible as possible to others who don't fit into that majority. And that is an example of Bishop Tutu's lesson. Number 8 is the revulsion against the vulgarity and cacophony of some gay activity. When people see the Sydney Mardi Gras or the Rio demonstrations and carnival, they sometimes think this is really horrible, especially if they're Anglo-Saxon. They think behaviour that is so extraordinary and misbehaviour with people, males in high heels walking along the street and looking as though they're actually enjoying themselves. This is really terrible, and it has to be stamped out because it's gay and queer. And of course the LGBTIQ response to that is to try to take over those words. People say, well, why do you call yourself gay? That was a perfectly lovely English word. You were gay, you were happy. Well, it generally meant in the 19th century prostitutes, sex workers, and it's come to be used because people were taking it, especially queer. I found it very hard to use the word queer because of my age, but they're using it in order to say, we're not going to let you use it at us, we're going to use it about ourselves. But there are people who find that revolting. Number 9th, some people have an individual bad experience with a gay person. Well, plenty of people have a bad experience with heterosexual people. In a case called Green against the Queen, a young man who had been abandoned by his family, everyone had been horrible to him, except the man who played the organ at the local Methodist church, or Uniting Church. And that man, on one evening, made a sexual pass at Mr. Green, who was aged 20. And Mr. Green picked up a pair of scissors and cut into the chest of the organist a butterfly design and killed him. And the question was he doing that in self-defence against the horrible attack on him of putting his hand on the knee of Mr. Green? And the majority of the High Court said, well, that could be provocation. I said, if every woman in Australia who had been approached in a similar way felt entitled to and was upheld in cutting a butterfly wound on the chest, that were to be a lot of dead males, and that we don't. I didn't believe that the law in Australia condoned such a homophobic view about ordinary people's reactions, permitted reactions. And the 10th reason that I feel exists is the reason of fear of one's own demons. And I believe I may not be justified in the ultimate outcome of the investigation going on in Orlando, but I do believe that Martin, in the attack on the Pulse nightclub, had these unresolved hatred of homosexuals, and he was trying somehow to expunge them from himself and his body, despite what his life had been. And the result of that was that 50 people, including himself, were killed. So one good thing the new network at Curtin is undertaking is it is researching what people say about the reason for their feelings of distaste. It would be very interesting to know what were the reasons of distaste that led members of our federal parliament to decide that exceptionally, for the first time since 1916, we're going to interpose another extra non-constitutional step in the legislation on marriage equality or same-sex marriage. We're going to interpose a national plebiscite. Why do they feel that they want to do that? What is the feeling of distaste, dislike of LGBT people that causes them to do it? And the way Dr. Kinsey answered that, he actually went up and asked people. I know it's an extraordinary thing to do, to actually go and talk to people and get their responses. And I was told this morning in my meeting as the new patron of the centre and associated with the network, that they actually are already doing this investigation. And if we can get to what are the basis, I've given you 10 possible suggestions, but they're not going to be the full list, and we can perhaps get to the bottom of what is the reason, and once we do that, in the manner of science, we can get to a more well-structured and targeted way of dealing with the demons and dealing with the problems. And I think that will, if the centre and the network do that, that will be a very important task, and it will be one worthy of Alfred Kinsey, who died 60 years ago today.